There are some magicians out there who claim to do all sorts of things, but they tell you it's a trick. And there are other people who are still just magicians who don't tell you it's a trick. In fact, they try and make out it's something real, something psychic, something where you're using mind power. So what you have is a person using the tricks to make things appear to be somehow psychic, showing themselves to be basically a magician, and yet they do not admit that they are in fact using tricks. Now, some tricks you can understand. Cold reading can be taught as if it is indeed something paranormal. However, spoon bending, in the case of Uri Geller, is a different story altogether. Uri Geller came to notoriety after demonstrating his abilities on television. He claimed to be able to use psychokinesis, dowsing, and telepathy. His performances have involved spoon bending, describing hidden drawings, and making watches stop or run faster. Magicians have said that his tricks can be replicated using stage magic tricks. In his autobiography, he admits using trickery. He had a trick where he would guess people's license plate number from their car. The information was given to him ahead of time, so he's willing to admit that he used trickery to bulk out his performances to make it seem more impressive. And yet, he was not willing to admit that it's all trickery. Uri Geller has appeared on many programs, claiming to have paranormal powers. He does not say they're tricks. He makes out it's mind power. With the spoon trick, the bending of spoons, all he's doing is getting a spoon he's never held onto before, holding it at a point, and saying to it, bend, bend, bend. But really, he's not doing that at all. The actual evidence for how it can be done and easily replicated is that it's pre-bent, and so it's held together very lightly, and then by simple manipulation you can make it bend with ease. In fact, it's interesting to note that Uri Geller's people, when he used to appear on chat shows and the like, used to supply the spoons and not use the spoons that were supplied to him. The claim about making watches work which weren't working before, or making other electrical devices somehow repair themselves, is an easy trick, and there are many ways of doing that. I suppose the easiest method is to plant devices, make it so they don't seem to work, and make it so they're set up to work. But of course, it's very easy to use sleight of hand when conditions aren't very well controlled. Uri would also ask the audience, the viewers, to basically place broken watches and clocks on top of their television or near their television, and to think about them working by your mind power. So picture the scene. You've got viewers at home with a few watches, a few clocks, where they're either broken or the batteries are a bit dead. And a few of them, a very small number, a tiny percentage out of 1,000,000 viewers, end up with some kind of positive result. And that's a tiny percentage of those who bothered to put watches on top of their TV, or clocks, or a broken TV next to their working TV and try and make it work. And if a few of them, a few out of millions, end up with a positive result, it must be Uri Geller. It must be mind power. Hardly controlled conditions. With the key bending trick as demonstrated by James Randi, the key is already bent. But you make it seem like it's bending still by moving the position of it in your hand, with the key part sticking out, appearing to bend upwards to some degree. Of course, it's an obvious trick. The person gives you a key. You're able to shift your weight on your chair or press it against the table, bend it to a small degree, but sufficient, and then by movement of the key in your hand, make it seem like the actual key itself is bending upwards, because you're bending the back of the key, and the front of the key, which is of course bent differently, it's at a different angle, not straight, appears to be bending upwards. But of course Uri Geller has appeared on a great many programs, and one example of him using other tricks, other methods, was on Living TV's Most Haunted. Most Haunted is a television program where they stumble around in old houses and claim to contact the dead. Well, detect ghosts or possible ghosts. They usually have a medium with them, and in this case they had the medium Derek Akora, and Uri Geller was along for the ride, saying that he sensed certain things from the location. Typically how mediums and psychics operate in haunted locations is educated guesses by appearance and location, or if they have prior knowledge so they can research, they'll look into the location and give incredibly precise examples of what happened there. Uri Geller had no prior knowledge as far as we're aware, and gave only generalities. Generalities that were made to fit, and seemed to fit to some degree. No names, nothing clear. Simply good guesswork. People like Uri Geller don't bother to try to prove their ability. They simply use their methods of doing their trick, claim it's paranormal, and let the audience, who don't know any better, assume it is magic, and assume that their acts prove that it is indeed something paranormal. There's an old Hitchens standard, which is basically that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. And in the case of Uri Geller, he claims that he got his paranormal abilities from extraterrestrials. He claims that aliens gave him superpowers. Yeah. Of course there's no evidence of this. There's no evidence at all that he even has superpowers. And of course we can dismiss his claims considering how they can be so easily replicated by magicians. In the early 1970s, the Jerusalem Post reported that a court ordered Geller to refund a customer's ticket price and pay court costs after finding that he had committed fraud by claiming that his feats were indeed telepathic. And in actual fact, on other occasions, Uri Geller has hinted that his abilities are in fact trickery. And Uri's manager was known to have actually helped out Uri Geller with certain information and props. If you're not willing to be tested in proper controlled conditions by a genuine scientific organisation, then there's always an alternative. Go to a bias organisation. Many psychics, including Geller, have gone to the Stanford Research Institute. This institute is basically a place where people can be tested for some of these claims of psychic powers. However, they've been heavily criticised in the past for having less than complete testing techniques, and therefore they allow certain people with certain so-called abilities to basically demonstrate certain powers, and they are convinced on occasion of these people having genuine abilities, even though if they actually had better controlled conditions, they would be able to confirm that these so-called abilities are far from complete. A number of books have been written about his work and how it can easily be replicated and how he appears to use sleight of hand. Stopping a watch is very easy. You don't need to do very much sleight of hand at all. All you need is quite a strong magnet. A strong but small magnet which can be easily concealed in the palm of the hand, and when held underneath, without people noticing, underneath the mechanism of a watch, it can appear to stop the watch by some kind of unknown paranormal means. But all it actually is simply the magnet itself preventing the parts from moving due to the magnetic attraction upon the metal. And if you want to know how simple that trick actually is and how easily it can be done, I was doing that when I was around about 6 or 7 years old. So it's very simple. Uri Geller has also claimed that he can predict certain events, including sporting events, which is kind of trivial, but even so, his predictions, some of which have actually come true, However, he's made so many over the course of decades that it's understandable that some predictions would come true, and some of the most obvious predictions would come to pass. So when predictions are made, you're bound to end up with some of them coming true. The magician James Randi pointed out in the tabloid newspaper, The Sun, that the teams that he picks out are more likely to lose when he picks them. In fact, his predictions are very often failing, they do not work, but of course he speaks about, and in fact brags about, the ones where he gets them right, which is usually no better than chance. Analysis of Uri Geller's predictions shows that he in fact damages people's sporting career and teams' sporting prowess. They're more likely to lose, they're less likely to feel any form of help, even though Uri Geller claims to predict the outcome, and even affect the outcome with psychic resonances. This effect, although not an actual effect, merely chance and publicity in the papers, was described by James Randi as the curse of Uri Geller. The curse itself is simply his inability to pick a good team or affect the outcome. Predictions? Hardly. Uri Geller has claimed to affect certain outcomes of certain football games and other sporting events. However, he's not been able to actually confirm this, and usually makes out he's had some kind of effect in retrospect. So something happens, or for that matter something does not happen, and he claims afterwards it's down to his mind influence. Picture this: a football game between England and Scotland. A penalty kick is about to take place. Scotland might well remain equal with England. And Uri Geller's overhead in a helicopter hovering above the stadium. And he claims that his influence moved the ball just enough that it would not land into the back of the goal. Now, he claimed after the event, not before, he claimed after, that he moved the ball so that it would not land in the back of the goal. When in actuality, all that happened was, it wasn't a perfect kick, and therefore it did not allow Scotland to equalise in that football game. It was simply a publicity stunt, where he tried to make out that he knew something which clearly he did not. The most famous occurrence of Uri Geller being a psychic detective was in 1992, where he helped out in a kidnapping case regarding a Hungarian model. Geller claimed that Helga Fargus would be found alive and well in the not-so-distant future. And you know what? She was found, having been murdered by her kidnappers. It's interesting to note that in 2007, he actually said that he no longer says that he has supernatural powers. He said that he was an entertainer, and he wants to do a good show. So basically, he had changed his claim from the idea that he was in fact a person carrying out the paranormal, the supernatural, to merely a conjurer, a magician. This was within a German magazine interview, and James Randi highlighted this issue, that he no longer claims to do supernatural things. Of course, Uri Geller's response is simply to say that the things he used to do, they were supernatural things, but he no longer does them as part of his professional career. The new character Geller's tried to create is a motivational speaker, a person who inspires positive thinking, positive mental attributes and attitude, because after all, in terms of his supposedly supernatural ability, the jig's up. In the process of developing his career, he's placed behind him his history as a magician who basically claimed to do genuine supernatural things. He still refuses to say he's a fraud, that he's a con man who's made millions from people's gullibility. On a radio interview on Coast to Coast Radio, Uri Geller claimed that his mind powers are the same sort of mind influence which people have when they pray and make things happen. That it's mental energy that basically influences life and the actions within life. And he even claimed that in a great many universities around the United States, the idea of prayer as an actual tool, as opposed to a merely psychological tool, has actually been explored, and they're realising more and more that prayer has a greater influence than people realise. Of course, this is nonsense. The psychological side, the idea of comfort or positive thinking, certainly that is valid. But the idea that you can actually use prayer to influence the world is clearly not shown to be evidentially true. The potential psychological benefit in certain cases proves nothing of these supernatural claims. Of course, if you want extraordinary claims, try going to Uri Geller's website. One claim made by Geller on his full biography on the website basically insists that in Germany, witnessed by reporters and photographers, he stopped a cable car in mid-air, using only the power of his mind. Of course, with reports like this, it could be anything. It could be that he's paid someone off, who actually controls the cable cars, to stop the cable car when it came close to Geller. So Geller could then claim, as a publicity stunt, that it was in fact him doing it with the power of his mind. Now understand, Uri Geller is using this as some kind of legitimacy on his website to try and say his abilities are in fact scientific, although they are not. He also talks about meeting various people such as Edgar Mitchell of the Apollo 14 mission and various other individuals, as if meeting people and discussing with them on occasion makes his work somehow scientific. By having a section on his website about the science behind him, he simply supports himself with a number of quotations from newspapers and says that he did certain tests with certain organisations. However, the evidence is not clear and he can't seem to do things reliably. And of course, naturally, he does not mention where he's failed. But of course, the purpose of the website is to market Uri Geller. It's about positive salesmanship, not about the facts. The nearest thing to legitimacy for Uri Geller was with the Stanford Research Institute I've previously noted, and of course the actual research was truly debunked. James Randi mentioned that the protocols for the serious investigation were not actually carried out in proper conditions. In actual fact, Dr. Ray Hyman and other assisting scientists looked into the issue and investigated and found the project was done in a very poor manner indeed. They found it was done in an informal manner and largely uncontrolled. They did their own tests on Geller in an impartial way and found that Geller exhibited no supernatural ability. Or to be clearer, they found no evidence for a supernatural ability. Perhaps the most famous instance of Uri Geller being debunked was on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. The items for the demonstration were pre-selected. Uri Geller and his people had no influence on the items. They could not pre-bend or tamper with them in any way, shape or form. Johnny Carson, a former magician, consulted with James Randi for advice on how to thwart potential trickery, including the idea of using items that could not be tampered with. The idea from James Randi was to have no influence over the items, for the show itself to provide their own props, and not to let Geller or his people anywhere near them. And for some reason, Uri Geller said he did not feel strong when he was there. He could not influence them, detect water in little containers which were not transparent for obvious reasons, could not bend the spoons, could not do anything, because he did not have prior knowledge or his own props to play with. Geller has been caught out many times. There are so many testimonies, so many TV shows, quite a few video clips actually, which show him basically failing. A television programme presented by Noel Edmonds, called Noel's House Party, had particular segments they would use, where it would be a candid camera-like situation. Typically, odd or distressing events would happen to celebrities with hidden cameras, so they would not realise that things are happening and they're on film, in fact on a TV programme. One particular instance had Geller on the show. Shelves would fall from the walls in a particular house. Things would happen, bumps and bangs. and Uri Geller would not know what's happening. The camera footage recorded shows Geller from angles he was not expecting, and due to this particular angle, you can see Uri Geller holding the spoon with two hands firmly, seeming to bend it, while getting up to display it had bent by some kind of psychokinetic power. Uri Geller has a tendency to sue people who are dangerous critics. Most famous, I suppose, would probably be James Randi. He tried to sue James Randi and numerous other people in the past because they were basically showing him up. Geller has been caught out time and time again with bogus cases. He sues someone over something minor, something he doesn't really have jurisdiction over. He fails and loses money. But at least by doing this, he tries to keep some kind of face. He makes out to the people who believe in him that he does genuinely believe in his supernatural powers. So once again, it's about the presentation. It's about marketing. It's worth noting that in 1998, the Broadcasting Standards Commission in the United Kingdom rejected a complaint made by Geller saying that it was unfair to show magicians showing how to duplicate those psychic feats. A UK documentary called Secrets of the Super Psychics basically exposed Geller and others and their most obvious tricks as being simple conjuring. But of course the failure does not end there. There are many cases I could mention on many different websites, many of them confirmable. Former supporters, former students, former friends and allies of Uri Geller who've basically spoken out against him. But also the irrational fear of criticism on the internet, with videos on YouTube and elsewhere being DMCA'd by Uri Geller's people. It seems like one of the greatest dangers to Uri Geller's career was the clip of The Tonight Show. The clip where Johnny Carson, who was advised by James Randi, set up conditions that Uri Geller could not cope with, and therefore could not perform. With those conditions in place, what could Uri Geller do? He thought, by removing the clip, he could hide his inadequacy. So, simply put, he's not psychic, he is a magician, he knows what he's doing, he knows he's not psychic, and he knows that any criticism is a potential danger to his cash flow.